My name is Adrian Crenshaw. I go by the handle Irongeek online, and my presentation is on network printer security, or how to hack a network printer. Now, we're going to keep this fairly informal. If you have a question during the session, just raise your hand, get my attention. I'll try to answer it along the lines, because there may be a few things that I neglect to tell you that I should. First, we're going to start off with, why would you want to hack a network printer? I mean, it's a printer, what can you do with it? Well, it's more than just dumpster diving. You used to think of printer security from the standpoint of what pages people throw out, what you could pull out of a dumpster to find information about a corporation or organization. But now, there's a lot more things you can do with printers since they've become network enabled. First of all, network printers are incredibly common. They've gotten cheaper and cheaper. You can get consumer models just for sitting on your desk at your home. They're fairly powerful. We're talking built-in OSs, full IP stacks, multiple different stacks like IPX, AppleTalk, and so forth. In some cases, like the Rico 7s, they actually run a version of NetBSD on them. A lot of sensitive data is sent to a printer. People may think a lot about how they store the data on the network and make sure it's secure and communications are secure in general. However, if you actually be on the LAN, there's a lot of sensitive data people send to the printer and never think about it because they don't think about printers being a possible inroads to being hacked. And finally, lack security. If people don't think about something, they have a tendency not to think about the security of it, and problems pop up. Now, there are several topics we're going to cover in this presentation, assuming I don't run over time, and I'm relying on other people to give me a yell whenever I start running over time. First of all, we're going to talk about different network printing protocols. We're going to talk about different languages, both page description languages and job control language. Finding printers on a network. If you can't find them, you can't do anything with them. Controlling printers. Simple printer tricks, mostly just fun stuff to give you some ideas of the concepts and give you something to play with. Using network printers as file and web servers. Sniffing and reprinting print jobs. And simple scripts in Perl, PHP, and PJL language. First of all, I'm going to show you pictures of a couple of different common network printers or network printer servers. These are two external JetDirect boxes. This one hooks up via USB, this one hooks up via a parallel port. These are internal that you actually plug into an HP printer. Plug into the Ethernet jack and you should be online. You can configure them to get the IP address via DHCP or whatnot. Generally speaking, you find the IP address if you have a local printer by hitting a little test button. This little 170X, it'd be right about there, a little test button on the back you can press to actually pull up the diagnostic sheets. Internals, you generally have to press the right information keys on the printer itself to be able to pull up the IP address and other settings. Now, HP is not the only network printer vendor, obviously, but they're one of the most popular, and a lot of other people follow suit. For instance, a lot of stuff I'm going to tell you can do with a JetDirect, you could also do with a Rico 7, and those other network printer vendors like Tektronix, Brevard, Epson, Netgear and Linksys both make their own little external boxes you can hook up. Linksys I know uses IPP, and I don't believe they use the RAW port. We'll go into that more in a second. And there's a lot of other network printer vendors that you might want to look into. Most of my research, because of what I have around and available that I've looked into, is on JetDirects and Rico 7 printers. There's another guy out there online that does a lot of looking into, his name is Elite Wolf. He does a lot of looking into Tektronix. I'll have a link for him later on if you look at my webpage on network printer hacking. First of all, there's different printer protocols you'll want to be aware of. These are basically the network printer protocols that your print server, your like Windows or Linux, rather than CUPS print server, or your machine itself will use to talk to the little onboard computer inside the printer. One of the more common ones is LPD, which stands for Line Printer Daemon. This is common in the Unix world, but you can use this in Windows also if you install the Unix services for Windows. That communicates on port 515 TCP. IPP, which stands for Internet Printing Protocol. Once again, if you got CUPS in Linux, no problem to print to that. In Windows, no problem to print to that. That communicates over port 631, and it's based on HTTP. A little bit more on that in a bit. And one of the most common is called JetDirect, sometimes called AppSock, sometimes called RAR, and sometimes called PDL data stream. It communicates on port 9100. A lot of my tutorials will be on that because Rico 7s and HP JetDirects all use that port. The Hijacker toolset uses that port, and there's a lot of things you can do with it. To give you an idea what these protocols look like if you looked at them in plain text, right here is what LPD looks like. This is basically a dump from Etherrail. I found the print job going across the network, right-clicked on it, said follow stream, and this is what we have. At the top, you'll see a little bit of information about who sent the job. You see these @ symbols in PJL, printed job language. These are commands that are sent to control how the job is printed. I'll give you more details on that in a second. You see this Adobe, PostScript Adobe 3.0? That's telling it what kind of file you have attached or what kind of data stream you have attached and how it's going to print it. That's basically the actual description of how the page is supposed to look. IPP, as you can see, HTTP based. This is the basic way in which it's sent to the printer. IPP is, I believe, the main protocol that CUPS uses, but it can use the other ones as well. Then there's RAW. RAW is probably the simplest of all those protocols. As you can see, we just start off with PJL commands. Then here's our PostScript section. That's the actual thing that's to be printed. Now, there's different languages that a printer uses. First of all, we should talk about page description languages. The two most common are PCL, printer command language from Hewlett-Packard, and PostScript from Adobe. Then there's job control language. Job control language is used, at least in HP printers and a lot of other printers, to control how the print job is done. Page description basically tells it, okay, I want the graphics to be designed like this, I want this text here, I want all this here. Job control language tells you, I want to print out this many sheets, I want it stapled, I want it duplex, I want all this other stuff about it. As well as a lot of other things you may not expect. Here's an example of what a PCL file might look like if I open it up in Notepad++. Anybody that's doing any kind of file editing of Unix files and Windows files at the same time, but they're doing it from a Windows workstation, I highly recommend Notepad++ because it doesn't mess up Unix file line returns. Here's an example of what PostScript looks like, and it's way too small. If you could read that, it's a lot more readable. It starts off with PS Adobe 3.0, some information about the print job, and when you get down further, it's basically a description of how the page is supposed to look and tells it how to draw the graphics, how to put the text on the page. Now here's an example of PGL. PGL starts off with the escape character in ASCII. We'll more details on that later. Along with this to tell it, okay, we want to switch personalities if you're in a personality. A personality is basically what kind of page description language you're using at the time, either PCL or PostScript or whatnot. And then it sets various things, like this particular command, PGL job name, just sets the name of the job. Auto tray and change, it's going to select its tray. It's going to set it to be duplexed. It's going to bind it along the short edge, so on and so forth, all the way down the line. This sets various bits of information, like the resolution the printer's going to print at. And then finally, it tells it what language it's going to be in this case PCL. Then the actual page description part of the print job starts off. All these files are actually things I could, if I wanted to, just replay to a printer later on. And we'll go into details of that later on. But that's just the basics of a printer job language. Now, before you can actually mess around with printers, you got to find out where they are. Now, if you have physical access to one, most of them either in the menu system or using a test button, you can find out the IP address. But I'm also going to show you how to find some on the network using Nmap, some SNMP tools. And SNMP stands for Security Not My Problem. Or at least that's the running joke. Simple network management protocol, I believe. And most modern day network printers seem to have it enabled. And it's a great way to go out there and find out what a printer is, find out what type of hardware it is, and find out a lot of information with very little problem. And then finally, I'm going to show you how to do a little Google hacking for network printers that people have at various facilities, and they somehow linked up to the web page, and now everybody in the world will know about it if they do a search. First of all, Nmapping for printers. Nmap space dash uppercase A, that tells it to do an OS scan, as well as do a version detection scan on the ports it finds open. By the way, don't do this on versions of Nmap previous to, I believe, 3.90. It'll actually print out garbage print jobs. I'll give you some more details on that later. But here's some interesting ports that are opened up on this particular JetDirect box. We have the FTP port, because you can FTP print jobs that are already constructed to this particular JetDirect printer, and that's common for a lot of printers. telnet for going in and configuring it. Port A is open for administration over the web. 280, which is another port it uses. This particular JetDirect box is a little older and it uses a Java applet that serves up via its little web daemon for controlling it. You see it has, oh great, if I remember right, it has LPD and as well as IPP open and the JetDirect or ROR port open. And that's the information you found out. Seeing this information, you can be pretty much assured what kind of printer it is. Also, there's some options you can throw to nmap. If it tells you who the MAC address belongs to, and it says the MAC address belongs to the vendor Hewlett-Packard or Ricoh Savin, you have a good idea that what you just nmapped was a printer. But the big clue is these particular ports are open, and it's taken a wild guess that's HP embedded. My understanding the JetDirects actually run a version of I hate the fact it's skipping my mind right now. VxWorks. And the Ricoh Savin's, my understanding, is running a version of NetBSD. In mapping for printers, here's some of the UDP ports that are open. You notice that port 157 UDP is open. This is basically. We have mics back? Oh, okay. We have mics! That thing about detecting the MAC address and knowing the vendor, that's a quick clue that this is also a printer. And a thing about the way I structure usually most of my stuff that I showed, it's a screenshot of the command line in Unix. What was that? Oh, I thought I heard something else a second. Anything that's in black is just the command prompt itself. Red is a command that you enter. Anything in green is what that command outputs. So if you remember that color scheme, you know what's what. But pretty much red is just the stuff that you typed in, and everything else is generated for you. Here's another example of mapping Ricoh Savin. You'll notice a lot of the same ports open on it. It's on JetDirect. Now, a quick nmap note. Anything before 3.9, if it scans port 9100, 9100, the ROR printer port, is pretty dumb. It'll pretty much try to print anything you send to it. So you'll get garbage print jobs with lines like this on each page, and it'll print off like a few hundred pages. For a while there, if someone used Nmap to scan your entire facility, you might see that kind of garbage coming out your printer. It happens. Luckily, I asked Fedor about it, and he made some extra functionality in 3.9 that basically, by default, it does not do the service probe on port 9100. It considers it an unsafe port to do that on. Yay, Fedor. All right, another way you can find network printers is to use different SNMP tools. You can use HP's WebAdmin. I think it's clunky, but it's the only one that's currently supported and has features you're not going to find in some of the older tools. One of the older tools is HP JetAdmin for Windows. You can just do a quick scan of the network and find all sorts of network printers that are out there. These particular names, if you use NetBIOS, you should be able to resolve them. If you just said, if you were on Windows and you said ping and that name, it should resolve the name for you. If you have Samba running on your Linux box, I believe it's going to resolve that name as well. Another tool you can use is Smart Device Manager. This is something that Ricoh Savin makes. You can scan an entire IP range. It'll tell you what kind of printer it's hooked up to it. You can find out its IP address, whether or not it needs new supplies and so forth, and a bunch of other information about that particular network printer. I also like using Foundstone's SNS scan. That's another SNMP tool. And when you scan a certain IP range, it quickly tells you what kind of device you're dealing with, and you can search through that for network printers. And finally, SoftPerfect's NetScan I really dig. And it can do the same thing with SNMP. And also you can use it for finding SMB shares on a network. That's what I use for finding rogue file shares. Oh, something I didn't mention in an earlier slide. Protocols I'm not discussing is stuff like IPX and how you print with IPX, because quite frankly, I don't have a lot of experience with it. Some modern Ricoh Savins actually have SMB printers built in, where you can use it as a printer share, like if it's a Windows box. Haven't messed with that. If anybody wants to mess with that and give me more information, send it to me. I'll give you full credit and post it into the network printing page.
Small question?
Yes?
What about JetAdmin, HP JetAdmin?
HP JetAdmin?
Yeah. It searches also network and will give you Lux printers.
That one?
HP
Jetadmin?
Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't see you mention it.
Yeah, HP Jetadmin will do that, and they no longer support HP Jetadmin. You have to go find some place to download it. The modern one is like a HP Web Jetadmin or something like that, and you have to install it on a box, and you access it over a built-in web server. And I think it's a little clunky, but you can do the firmware update and everything else from it. So it has all the features. I just don't like it because it's clunky. You have to install it. It's not as easy to use as to me as just plain old Jetadmin. And also, finally, you can Google for printers. Here's a few common search strings. One of these I came up myself. Most of them I got from johnny.ihackstuff.com. He has a few other ones you might want to check out. But if you used any of these particular search strings, you're going to find some printers in Google. Basically tells, find me web pages with this in the title, containing this text. In URL, I want this particular string to appear in the URL, and so forth. And this is a great way to find network printers. If you have a facility, like let's say you work at a corporation, you may want to do a quick search of your particular corporation's network for this by specifying the site : IBM.com or whatever, to see if there's any printers you might have open and accessible. More than likely you may not, but it's worth giving a shot. Controlling printers. There's several different ways you can control these printers. A lot of times people just hook up the little external JetDirect box, so the internal one, they don't configure a password on it at all, and you can just get in and actually configure everything from a built-in web interface. But the way you normally control these printers, at least the JetDirects, is via a web page, via Telnet, via various SNMP tools, and if it's an old JetDirect box, this and this are kind of the same because all the web page does is serve up a little Java applet that uses SNMP. And finally, Hijetter, which sends certain commands over to port 9100 to do odd tasks. A little bit of password info for you. On the older JetDirects, the Telnet password and the device password you might use for the web page or SNMP tools and so forth is different. It's not necessarily the same, which confuses the hell out of people. It confused the hell out of me the first time I ran into it. On newer ones, it is the same. And on newer JetDirects, if you run into it asking you for a username, old ones don't ask you for the username at all. New ones, root, admin, administrator, and supervisor are all equivalent. And but if it doesn't have a password set, I believe it just lets you straight on in on the new ones too. A lot of people don't bother to set a password. It's a good idea to set a password. Also, since it's Telnet, there's some security problems there because you could sniff the connection if you're on the same LAN and find the password. And if it's the web browser, you can sniff the password and find it. Luckily, very modern JetDirects actually have web servers built in that you can use SSL over. A little bit more information I just gave you. Another way you can obtain the password, you can reset the password if you have physical access to it by basically holding down the test button, unplugging it, plugging it back in, letting the light flash a few times, and then letting it go. However, there's this really bad vulnerability that older JetDirects have, and a lot of people never upgrade the firmware in the JetDirects that you can use to pull the password off of them. Use SNMP get from a Linux or a BSD box. I imagine you can do it in OS X as well. I'm telling you, use version 1 of the SNMP protocol, the community string public, the IP address network printer, and this particular MIB. That gives me this hex string back out. If you go ahead and decode that hex string in ASCII, 50 equals P, 41 equals A, so on and so forth, what you get is password equals 108. What is first part before the equal sign? Whatever you get is the actual password of that particular JetDirect box. You can use all of the network as long as you know the community name, and most people don't bother to change the community name from public. Yes?
What printer is that work on?
This particular test model was a 170X JetDirect. I don't remember the particular revision it was. And the bad thing about the 170X, you can't upgrade the firmware. This is stuck like this for fucking ever.
So it's out there in deployment, or is it super, super old?
Oh, no, it's a lot of them. See, that was like one of the first lower-end JetDirects that anybody could buy for cheap. I think you can find them. I think the average price I saw...
So if I bought a JetDirect maybe 2 years ago...
It might very well be this one.
Okay.
Because they're still out there and you can still buy them.
Okay,
right. And you can't upgrade the firmware, which sucks. But that's how... It's pretty dumb. So you could get in, easily pull out the device password, get in and configure it. Also, if you can't use public, try to community string internal or private. It's been reported to me, in my test, if you change the community string, you can't get in unless you know the community string. However, I've had reports that on some JetDirect boxes, even if the community name is changed, you can still get in using the community name internal, regardless. Common community strings, which I just covered, public, internal. I haven't actually tested this, but it's rumored it will work on some JetDirects even if you change it, and private. Website management. Here you see me pulling up the pane in the little Java applet. Older JetDirects use a little Java applet to serve up. New ones actually seem to send the communications in band. But this basically allows me to configure things like IP address, what protocols are used. A good security idea is probably any protocol you don't use. If you're only using TCP/IP, turn off everything else. No need to have it out there. It's only going to cause more network chatter. And of course, while you're in there, you want to enable a password and make sure everything's configured right. I'll tell you why you want to enable a password later on, because there's things people can do with these settings to totally mess up your LAN. Telnet. I'm going to give you a quick example of some things you can do with Telnet to configure your box. You can type in a quotation mark at the command prompt of most JetDirects and get more information on what things you can set. But here I log in with a password called this pass. I tell it allow 0, which basically means allow any IP address to attach. One of the few security measures you really have on these JetDirects, and I imagine other network printers, is you can restrict what IPs can talk to them. When you do this, that means no SNMP tools can talk to it, nobody can try to print to it, only that one particular IP address. Yeah, you can spoof the IP address, that has some other complications, but it's at least an extra level of security. What you'll generally want to do, especially if you're using some kind of print tracking software to be sure how many print jobs people are sending, is to set up for only the IP address of your CUP server or your Windows print server can talk to that particular JetDirect box. That'll also keep people from outside the network, if your firewall doesn't block all the right ports, from being able to connect to that particular machine and control it. This basically says allow anybody in. Then I connect and I tell it to allow this particular IP address as well as anything that matches this IP address with this network mask. So everything that has an IP address of 192.168.20. something. Then I list out which ones I set, I quit, and it saves the settings. And now only this particular IP address and all the IP addresses in this range should be able to talk to my JetDirect box. That's a good idea to keep people from doing various denial of service attacks and other tricks I'm going to be showing you later on. Here's links to all those SNMP tools I told you about earlier. The SNMP Git I was showing you, that's part of the Net SNMP tool package you should be able to get for any Linux distribution, any BSD distribution, and I imagine pretty much any Unix-like operating system. Okay, next tool I'm going to show you is Hijacker. Hijacker is a neat little tool. There's a command line equivalent. This is the web page where you can get both of these. Basically, Hijacker is the Windows GUI. PFT is a command line version that you can compile in Unix-like operating systems as well as Windows, I believe. And you can use it to configure all sorts of things about that printer. One fun thing to do, did someone ask a question? Oh, sorry. One thing that's fun to do is set the default language to check or something along that lines. And rebooting the system doesn't change it. The only way to change it again is to use something like Hijacker and send the right PGL commands to set it back, which can be really annoying to people. Even unplugging it, plugging it back in, unless maybe you left the power off for a long amount of time, it's still going to be in check.
Can't you go through the menu system?
Unfortunately, at least what I've played with in the menu system, no.
Really?
Not to mention the menu system is going to be in check at that point. So maybe I'm failing because the menu system is in check. Maybe there is a place, but the only way I was able to get it out was a Hijacker. So if you have a Czech friend, call them over. Simple printer tricks. This is, all this stuff is useless, but it'll give you ideas on how to play with printers. Printing an HTTP GET request, printing with Telnet, setting a printer's LCD screen with Telnet, and zombie scan. All right, if you web surf to the IP address of your printer, port 9100, wait a second, then hit stop. Here's what's going to happen. The 9100 tells it, connect on port 9100. By default, your web browser is going to try to connect on port 80. You don't want to do that. Anything that 9100 gets, pretty much it's going to try to print. You hit stop to tell it to kill the connection. Here's what you might get if you tried web surfing to your printer on port 9100 in Firefox. and an internet exploiter. That's basically the basics of trying to get the root document off of a web server. Not useful, but fun to play with. If you want to print something using just Telnet, you can Telnet to the port. Let's Telnet to that particular IP address of that JetDirect box or Rico 7 or what have you on port 9100, enter some garbage, use the exit character for your Telnet session, quit it, and if you go check, whatever you typed in this case hello printer, should be waiting for you on the printer. Like I said, raw printer protocol is very simple, it's very dumb. But it works most of the time. Setting the LCD from Telnet. Now, I used to do more complicated ways of doing this using escape sequences, but I was telling the fact by a dig user who saw one of my articles that you don't actually have to use the escape characters. You can Telnet to port 9100 into @PGL to tell you want to use a printer job language command and use the PGL command ready message display some text, then quit out. At that point, if you have a HP printer and you go check it out, you're going to see on the LCD screen the words some text. You also do the exact same thing with Netcat, if you're so inclined. This I know works on pretty much every HP printer I've ever tried. Some people refer to it as a security exploit. It is not. It's by design by HP, so you can send something in a print job to change the LCD. The Rico 7s do not implement this particular PGL command. One of the things you find about PGL, it's used by a lot of network printer vendors. However, not everybody implements all of it, and some people implement it differently. And that's what the results would be. Now, there's a few different ways of sending messages. There's the ready message, which I use, which basically puts the message up and that's it, and the printer's still online. The op message takes it offline, and the ST message takes it offline and sends a message back. Don't worry about that particular one for right now. These two, if you use them, takes the printer offline, they can't print. In theory, you could send the ready message to be what it shows, but the printer's actually offline. Or you can use it for social engineering, saying, printer problem, please call such and such number and talk to the person, if you're so inclined. Try changing the language with hijacker. I've covered that before. Oh, another thing I'm aware of, some modern day network printers have web servers built in where they store documents that have been faxed to the multifunction printer, or they've been scanned on the multifunction printer, or just been printed. And you can find stuff on the web server, like if you go to one of the Rico 7s, you can find fax numbers that have tried to connect. That might be useful for social engineering, as well as documents that have been saved on the internal hard drive of the Rico 7 in PDF format, open to the world. Now, you can password enable them, but a lot of people don't. And if you're not filtering port 80, someone from outside your organization might be able to get in, look around, find documents you printed, social security numbers that you have, payroll records, whatever. File and web servers. Another cool thing you can do, this doesn't matter if you have the password enabled or not. This is all using PGL commands over 9100. On the multifunction printers, in this case, I believe I used a HP 4100 with an internal JetDirect multifunction printer. You can actually FTP, well, it's not FTP. Basically use PGL commands to upload and download files to and from it. And you can use hijacker to do this particular task. You can also use that PFT program I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, you only do one thing at a time. I'd like to find someone that can help me code up something that would do it all at once so you can like grab everything from the printer at one time. Here's a few things I've found on network printers, JetDirect-based printers. In this particular path, I've found documents with names like that that happen to be faxes or print jobs that have been sent in. I believe in that case it was JPEGs, TIFF files and fax out that were faxes, PCL files, which you can open up in SwiftView or reprint yourself by techniques I'll show you in a bit, in fax in, and other information. Like this is a log of different IP addresses that have contacted that particular JetDirect. And all of this can be done without a password, because it's all using PGL commands over port 9100. Where to put files. This is fun. Let's say you know there's a printer in an organization and you want your own file server. Well, telling people to download hijacker to transfer files back and forth, you wouldn't want someone to do that. That's a pain in the ass. You want to use a standard protocol. Well, you can put the file there with hijacker. In this case, this is a LaserJet 4100 MFP multifunction printer. I believe with 20 gigabytes of storage. If you go to this path in hijacker and put a file, you can access it with this path via the web server. So let's say I put in this path, naughtylinuxgirls.avi. I could access it using this particular URL from anywhere in the world. So basically, you have a 20 gig wares and porn service sitting on the network. No passwords required, except for maybe for this web part. Maybe. Because a lot of times you can still get to the web page, you just can't necessarily get to the administration part of the web page if you don't have the password. I should have changed the background of this. This is showing a zombie scan. To really understand how this works, you might want to check out Fedora's notes on insecure.org. Basically, you use Nmap to do a zombie scan where you use the IP ID, you use the JetDirect box that has a simple protocol stack, it has a predictable IP ID, and you fake a connection to the box you want to scan as the JetDirect's IP address. It responds back to the JetDirect. Its IP ID either does or does not get incremented based on whether or not the port's open. Then you scan for what the current IP ID is of the JetDirect box, and you can tell whether the port's open. It's really complex to explain. Fedora has a better illustration on his website, and I have a better explanation in my notes on my website. Bad thing about it is there's certain things you can't do. It'll allow you to turn on zombie scan, but at the same time do OS detection. If you turn on any other flags, pretty much, your box has to talk directly to the box you're scanning, so it's going to give away any kind of anonymity. Sniffing and reprinting a print job. You should be able to do this with most of the modern security live boot CDs. For me, I used Auditor for this. Backtrack, well, thank you. Backtrack should have no problem doing it as well, but I didn't want to redo my video. All this video is stuff I did for Droops' Informaticon episode TV7, so check it out if you want to see this in its entirety. Here's me in Windows just sending a print job. Simple stuff. Now, at the same time that I was sending that print job, I used my Linux box. In this case, I just used the Auditor boot CD. Backtrack should work. I used EtherCap in text mode. Tell it to be quiet. I don't want to see anything. I tell it to write out a printer dump and do a man-in-the-middle attack using ARP. Now I have to be on the same local area network to pull this one off. And I'm going to ARP poison between either the print server on the network and the little JetDirect box, or between the box that's printing direct IP printing to the JetDirect box. And I sit there and wait for it to start collecting data. And eventually, I quit out of it. Then, once I have my dump, or I think I've collected enough data to have a dump, I go ahead and go into eForreal, open up the dump I created in EtherCap. I'm going to use a filter real quick to only show me stuff that was traveling to port 9100. That's that raw printer port I was talking about before. If you want to use IPP or one of the other protocols, basically change the port. The same thing should work. So I'm telling it, find one's a send flag, so I just find the start of the communications. And the destination IP address is port 9100 TCP. Once I find them, I find several different print jobs. I can right-click on one, follow the stream, and I only want to see it in one direction. I don't need to see the entire conversation. I just want to see what was sent to the printer. Once I have that, I make sure I set it to RAR, and I'm going to save that out as a file. If you've ever done direct IP printing, if you ever do printing to a file in Windows, you might have created a little PRN file. This is the exact same thing. Once I save this out, I basically have the entire print job in a little file I can use. And I'll show you how to use it in a second. This is me just telling it the file name. I'll skip ahead. Now, to replay that print job, I can do one of two things. I can either FTP it to the printer, and by the way, I'm obviously not going to be using the same printer that I sniffed it from. But since PCL and PostScript are pretty much universal, as long as your printer understands PCL PostScript, the job control language stuff may differ, but the PCL and PostScript is going to be fairly universal. So you'll be able to take that same file to a printer that you control and FTP it to it if it supports FTP printing, and you'll have your print job come out on that printer. You can also use something like SwiftView for PCL, which isn't open source or freeware, unfortunately, or you can use GhostView in Windows or Linux to use PostScript files. So you don't even have to reprint them. You can just capture them and look at them. You can also do the same thing with the netcat. Basically here, I'm going to take the particular print job I saved, and I'm going to netcat it out to the IP address of the printer on port 9100. And since the raw port is a fairly simple protocol and pretty much prints everything sent to it, it's going to see that print job and print it for me. Bingo. Now I'm going to go real quickly into a few things you can do for scripting various types of attacks and doing odd things with programming languages and printers. Learn about PGL, printer job language. Here's a tech reference source that has a description of a lot of information about how PGL works and other commands I haven't shown. I'm going to use Perl because sockets are easy in Perl. PHP you can also do some stuff with. I don't have an example in this particular slideshow, but if you check out my webpage, I do have a little PHP webpage I created that you can use for sending messages to a printer. Sometimes you have to use the universal escape language, which is basically the escape character, which is ASCII equivalent, decimal 27, 1B hex, or 033 octal, to tell it to escape and use this sequence, and then start your PGL commands. And then use it again to go back into your page description commands. Sometimes you have to use it, sometimes you don't, but that's what that little part is when you see it in some of the code I'm about to show you. Now here's me actually telnetting to a JetDirect box or a Rico 7 and manipulating it with PGL commands. I connect to it. I shouldn't have wrapped. I'm going to say PGL info ID. It tells me what kind of printer it is. Status tells me it's online. The amount of memory, the page count, and other information. So you can create your own little Perl script to query all sorts of information from the printer. Here's a quick Perl script. Sets up a socket, connects to it, uses the /e to send the escape character, and all this one does is send a single message that you define in the command line to the printer's LCD screen. You can print a single line of text the same way pretty much, you just don't send the escape sequence. This one actually uses a loop, sets the LCD, and it does a countdown to destruction. So like, 1, 2, 3, boom, or however you want to implement it. All these examples are on my website. I'll show you all for that in a second. Printer spam. I wanted to mess around with a programming language called FreeBasic. So I created a quick multi-threaded application that allows you to use any command, insert ~IP, and it'll insert the IPs in order in whatever range you tell it to. So in this case, I'm telling this particular range of IP address, use IP iterator, and execute this command for every single IP address. What this is a pre-saved print job that I generated in Windows, and I netcat it out to port 9100. So if I know an organization's IP range, you could try sending a print job to every single printer at that organization. I was surprised people haven't done this before. You get fax spam all the time. I've never seen printer spam. And a lot of organizations leave port 9100 open because they don't think about it. So this would probably work for a lot of organizations. And you can IP iterator from my website as well. It's a little rinky-dink FreeBasic tool, but it works in both Linux and Windows if you compile it. Multi-threaded and all that cool stuff. If it doesn't work, fix it and send it back to me. If anybody has any cool ideas for some of the stuff I've shown you, a lot of you out there are a hell of a lot better coders than I am. I'd love to have help on these projects. Simple IP stacks. There's some DOS attacks that can be pulled off. Because of the simple IP nature, a lot of them are like single-threaded. So if you connect to port 9100, nothing else can connect to port 9100 at the same time. So you can take out that particular printer by connecting to it, and no one else can connect to it and print. Huge print jobs. In this case, I'm netcatting out my entire hard drive to that printer and trying to print it. Don't be an ass and do these kind of things. But I'm just saying that's a possibility. This is no reason why you want to do IP restrictions on your JetDirect box. Partial firmware uploads. As I recall, you don't actually have to use the password to be able to upload a firmware. You can start a firmware upload, then kill it halfway through, and you basically kill the JetDirect box. Luckily, you can go ahead and re-upload a new firmware, but temporarily the box is hosed. That's just denial of service attacks on the printer itself. There's also denial of service attacks you can do on the network. If you give the JetDirect, let's say they don't have an admin password for it, if you give the JetDirect the same IP address as the gateway of the subnet it's on, all sorts of hell is going to break loose. If you get the net BIOS name of one of the common file servers on the network, all hell is going to break loose. And if you want to really confuse the printer, I should have moved this one up here. But a LAN attack is basically where you forge a packet as the same IP address you're trying to connect to, and you basically fool it into sending data to itself over and over and over and over again. Like I say, I'm talking to you on port 80, and I'm the same IP address as you. Oh, I'm going to send data back to me. Oh, I just got new data from me. I'm going to send back to me, and so on and so forth, ever going. Further ideas for research. I don't know how to pronounce the name, but Phenolite Group has Chai services, which is basically some information on using Java on HP JetDirects to do other functionality. It might be interesting to look into worms, backdoors, and malware. Modifying the PFT code so that you can do automated grabs, like grab the entire directory structure. As it is now, you have to grab one file at a time. And while it's a great tool, it's still a little bit buggy. It'd be nice if you just give an IP range and grab all the things from all printers on it. Vulnerabilities in the network printer implementation, like buffer overflows and such. Haven't looked into that enough. Hacking the firmware in JetDirects to create your own dial-home devices. You've heard of people modifying Linksys wireless routers to be able to do things like this. I haven't found enough information on the hardware to be able to do this yet. Not to mention JetDirects are more expensive than Linksys wireless routers, so you probably wouldn't want to do it unless you had them sitting around. But it might be an interesting thing to look into. And also, I've contacted the guy who does Kane to see if he'll implement in some automatic printer sniffing functionality so you don't have to do all the stuff I showed you earlier and make it easier. And I've tried to write my own EtherCAT filters to do it, but unfortunately I've had very little luck getting that to work because either I'm doing something wrong and the documentation isn't quite right, but it never actually worked for me. And that's pretty much all, folks. If you want to see more information on printers, this is only a little bit of the information that I had time for. Check out this particular URL, and I have a ton more information about network printer security. Any questions?
We're going to probably time for just one question.
Question.
Make it a good one.
Sorry that went so fast, but I had to get everything in at the end. Yes?
You said this presentation's on your website?
Well, this PowerPoint slide presentation isn't, but pretty much all the screenshots are, and a lot more text. When you print it out, it's about 28 pages in small font. It's a lot of stuff. But pretty much everything I showed here is in the web page. Anything else? I guess we're done. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks. At the end there, I feel like I was still might.